Figma is currently my favorite tool for UI design, and there are some very good reasons for that. But the main reason I use Figma is the Auto Layout feature. With it, you can group elements in a way that allows you to quickly align them, but also add spacing between and padding around those elements. You can also easily change the order of the items in that group, and you can switch from horizontal to vertical display with the click of a button. Now, I strongly believe that if you're going to use Figma for UI or UX design, then you need to learn Auto Layout. It's going to make your life 10 times easier. It's not that difficult to learn, and it's exactly what I'm going to show you in this course. I'm going to try to do it in about 30 minutes, give or take. We're going to start by learning how to add Auto Layout and where we can add it. Then we'll talk about spacing, padding, and alignment. We'll have a look at the available spacing modes. And finally, we'll discuss resizing in regards to Auto Layout. But hey, if you're just meeting, my name is Purdila. I'm a web designer / developer, and my goal with these videos is to help you become a better web designer or developer. Now, before we get started with this course, I want to quickly tell you about a resource that I use very frequently, and that is Envato Elements. Here you can find tons of useful resources like fonts, icons, UI kits, WordPress themes, music, stock photos and videos, illustrations, and much more. For creatives like me, this is an amazing resource because all the assets have simple commercial licensing and you're not bound to any contract. Therefore, you can cancel whenever you want. So, if you're interested, check out the link in the video description. And with that said, let's get into Figma's Auto Layout, and we'll start by learning how to add it and where. That's coming up. So let's jump straight in here. I have a simple demo prepared for you. I'm going to assume you are familiar with Figma and that you already have an account and you know your way around the software. So for our first demo, we have these 4 boxes. And before adding Auto Layout to anything, we need to know where we can add it. Well, currently, Auto Layout can only be added to frames, like the one that I have here, and components. For the rest of this course, we'll only be dealing with frames, so just keep that in mind. You cannot add Auto Layout to groups, for example. You might be tempted to think that, but it's not possible. Auto Layout can only be applied to frames and components. So, with that said, how do you add it? Well, there are several ways. First of all, you need to have at least one element selected. So assuming that I want to create a frame with Auto Layout with these 4 elements, I'm going to select all of them. And from here, I can add Auto Layout the following way. I can right-click and choose Add Auto Layout. I can use the shortcut key Shift-A. I can even go to the menu inside Figma, and I can go to Object, Add Auto Layout. And by doing any of these 3 actions, Figma will automatically create a frame for me with the elements that I selected. As you can see, they are inside this newly created frame, and that new frame has Auto Layout added, just like you can see here in the inspector where it says Auto Layout. Now, if I have a frame with Auto Layout and I want to remove it, I can simply right-click, remove Auto Layout, or use Shift Option A. On Windows, it is a different shortcut. Or I can click the minus sign in the inspector. But of course, I can also go to the menu, Object, and remove Auto Layout. There's also a 4th way we can add Auto Layout. So let me undo here a little bit. Let's say I selected these 4 elements and I can make a frame with them initially. And then with that frame selected, I can right-click and add Auto Layout just like I would normally. Or I can go in the inspector and click the plus sign to add Auto Layout from here. Now, let's talk a little bit about the direction. notice these 4 items are now stacked vertically, right? Because by default, Figma set them to a vertical direction. And Figma does this automatically depending on how your items are arranged on the page. So for example, here it made sense to create a vertical direction because 3 of the items, or actually all 4 of the items, are kind of stacked vertically, even though their X values are a little bit different. But if these items, let me ungroup them, if these were placed something like this, then creating an auto layout frame with them would set it to horizontal. So it really depends on how your items are initially laid out. Now, regardless of how the direction is initially set, I can always change it from horizontal to vertical or vice versa by using these 2 controls right here. And as you can see, by creating this frame with auto layout, Figma automatically aligned and positioned these elements at equal distance. And the size of the frame is determined by the size of the items inside plus the space between them. So that's how auto layout works. Now, before I wrap up this quick lesson, I want to briefly mention absolute positioning. This is a killer feature in Figma Auto Layout. Basically, you'll see that if I'm trying to move this element inside the frame, its position is constrained. So I can use my arrow keys to shift its position within the frame, but it does so while maintaining the same spacing between it and the other elements. That means I cannot freely move this element. See, it kind of snaps into position. But there is a way I can do that, and that's by applying an absolute positioning to the element that I want. And you do that by going to the inspector and clicking here where it says absolute position. Doing that will actually take that element outside of the normal flow of the frame, and it allows you to freely move the element wherever you want. The frame will, of course, adjust its size because it doesn't take the orange element into consideration anymore. Only the 3 green elements are now dictating the size of the parent frame. And if you want to bring this back, at any point you can just toggle that button and it's now back into flow, and the frame is resized according to that element. All right, so now that we have the basics taken care of, let's move on and talk about changing the spacing between items and also the padding around items in an auto layout frame. That's coming up. Let's consider the following example. I have a simple menu, right, with 4 menu items. Now, to make sure that I have the same amount of spacing between these items, I can do it by hand, of course. I can select this one, measure the distance until the one on the, or to the one on its left. And once I'm happy, I can move on to the 3rd one, do the same thing, and do the same thing here, right? And that works. But next time I add a new menu item, I'll have to do that all over again. Well, an easier way to do this is with auto layout. So I would select these elements, Shift A, and then I can go in the inspector and I can change the spacing between items. Figma automatically sets the exact same amount of spacing. So if I want 16 pixels here, I can do it like that. If I want 24, I can do it and Figma will automatically set it for me. Alternatively, I can click and drag like this to get to the spacing that I want. And if I need to add another menu item, let's say I'm going to duplicate the contact. Well, Figma automatically sets the correct spacing between the new item and the older item in that frame because I have auto layout applied, which is fantastic. And of course, when I delete this, the frame automatically resizes itself to only reflect the width or the dimensions of the content inside. So that's one example. Let me show you another one. Here we have 4 elements, 2 shapes, 2 pieces of text. And each piece of text corresponds to a particular shape. How do we make it so these are both aligned and they have the exact same amount of spacing between them? Well, it's easy with auto layout. Select these 2, Shift A. Let's add a correct spacing, let's say 8 pixels. I'm going to do the same with this one, Shift A. Use the same amount of spacing. And if I want, I can select both of these frames, Shift A again, to create a new parent frame with auto layout. And I can set, I don't know, 32 pixels between these 2. And if I have another item, I can simply duplicate this frame. I can enter the new text, the new color, and I'll be good to go. And this is a good example that shows you that you can nest frames with auto layout. So in this main frame, frame 73, that has auto layout, I have 2 additional frames that each has auto layout applied to it with different spacing values. And this becomes very powerful on larger projects, as you'll see in some of the future lessons. Now, so far, we've talked about the spacing between items, but what about the padding? Well, this is where the padding comes in. And to demonstrate, let me show you demo number 4. Here I have a piece of text and an icon. And what can we do with this? A button, right? A button is something that you would create in pretty much every single UI design project. And a button is actually a component that can be reused, right? So it will preserve the same style, but it will have a different text. And Figma Auto Layout actually helps us tremendously in this regard, because here's what we can do. We can select these 2 elements, Shift A to create a new frame with them. I'm going to quickly align them here, but don't worry about alignment. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. I'm going to set the spacing to 8 pixels. So that creates 8 pixels of space between the text and the icon. And now to create the button look, I can select the frame and I can add a fill color to it, right? So let's actually do a little switcheroo here. I'm going to add the fill color as the blue. Then I'm going to select these 2 elements and I'm going to change the color to white. So now to make this button bigger or to add padding inside it, I can use the padding feature. And in Figma, initially you have 2 options here. You can set the horizontal padding, let's say 32 pixels, and that creates 32 pixels of padding to the left and to the right. And I can also use a vertical padding, let's say 16 pixels. So that will add padding inside my frame. I can also, go and change the border radius. And Figma actually allows me to change the padding values individually. So by setting the horizontal padding, I'm setting it on both left and right. And by setting the vertical here, I'm setting top and bottom. But I can click this icon, and that gives me individual control over all 4 sides. So I can change the left padding individually, the top padding, bottom padding, and also right padding individually, if that's what I want. But in my case, I prefer equal padding on 2 opposing sides. So this is how you change the padding. Of course, you can also use your mouse cursor to click and drag until you find your correct sizes. But there's also a faster way. If you hover on a frame that has auto layout and has padding applied, you will see some handles, right? These pink handles. And clicking it will open up a dialog where you can enter a value, or alternatively, you can click and drag to change the padding value just like so. If you hold down Shift while doing this, you'll change that value in bigger increments, in increments of 10. If you hold down Option while doing this, you'll also affect the opposing side, right? So now I'm clicking on the top and holding down Option, I'm affecting the top and bottom paddings. If you hold down Option and Shift, you can change all values at the same time. So as you can see, I'm changing top, right, bottom, and left at the same time. So again, Shift, Option, it's probably a different shortcut on Windows. It's probably Shift, Alt. But yeah, that's how you do it. And if you want to just affect two opposing sides, you would just hold down Option. So maybe on the right side here, I want 32 pixels, just like that. Also notice that we have a handle for the spacing between the items, right? So I can freely change the value like this without having to do it manually in the inspector. And this is, of course, applicable to all sorts of things. You don't necessarily need to use it for buttons. For example, if you have a piece of text that you want to nudge just a little bit further down compared to the element above it, well, you can take that element, that text element, Shift A to put it in a frame with auto layout and give it a top padding. It's really that simple. But the basics of working with spacings and paddings are these, the ones that I just showed you. All right, so spacing, check. Padding, check. We've already covered two of the biggest parts of auto layout. The third one, though, alignment, is where things get interesting. So let's check that out next. Let's talk about alignment. This is probably one of the biggest feature of the auto layout feature. So I guess we can call it a sub-feature of auto layout. But either way, here's how it works. Let's say I have 4 elements of different size, right? And I want to align them. So let's select them, Shift A to add a frame with auto layout. And by default, Figma set my direction to vertical. That's fine. Let's work with that for now. Let me also set a distance here of 4 pixels. So for the alignment, we're going to use this box right here in the inspector. And we have 9 different ways of aligning these elements in a vertical orientation. By default, Figma set them as top, center. The one that we're interested in here is the center part, because this essentially aligns the center axis of all 4 elements. If I were to set alignment like this, it will align them based on their left edge. If I were to align them like this, it will align them based on their right edge. Now, what about the other options? What if I click here or here or here? These are, roughly the same as their counterparts. Nothing much changes, for example, between this, this, and this. In fact, nothing really changes. And that's because we can't really see the change in this frame because it's set to resize according to the content inside. But if I was to resize this frame, I don't know, let's make it as big as my parent demo frame here. Well, this is where you'll see how alignment works, because alignment will actually determine how these items are displayed or are aligned inside their parent frame. So currently, they are aligned in the middle and to the bottom. So they are aligned to the bottom of the parent frame. If I want to align them also in the middle, but to the top, I would click this button. Or I can click this or this. If I want to align them straight in the middle on both directions, I would select this. And I think you get my point. You can clearly see how this works. So these are the available options when the frame is in vertical direction. But if I switch to horizontal, well, the items will now be arranged differently, right? I still have the same 9 options, but their arrangement will be a little different. So that's the basic use of alignment in Figma Auto Layout. But how do you put this into practice? Well, let me show you demo number 6 here. I have 2 items, a piece of text and an icon. And let's say that I want to align both of these elements. Select, Shift A, and then I can determine, okay, do I want these aligned to the middle or maybe to the bottom? And you know what? Let me actually increase the size of this icon so you can see what I mean a little bit better. If I want to align this in the middle, now I can just do this. If I want it to the top, I do this. Right? This is a very common way or a common place where you would use alignment. And since we're on this topic, let me actually show you an additional options for aligning 2 elements. If we click these 3 dots, we can see something here called text baseline alignment. If we check it, well, that's going to align the baseline of the text with the bottom part of this icon. And if I can just zoom in here, and if I'm going to drag a guide, you can see that the bottom part, the baseline, the text baseline is precisely aligned with the edges of this icon. And this is exactly what the this option is doing. It allows you to align the text baseline, if or align other elements to the text baseline, if that's something that you want to do. Usually, I don't use it. I thought I would mention it since we were on this topic. Usually, whenever I do something like this, an icon with a piece of text, for me, it's mostly aligned in the middle, just like that. Let me show you another example. Let's have a look at demo number 7. Here, I have a menu, and I want to align this with this button, okay? So first of all, Shift A on the menu and add some proper spacing. I can align the menu items vertically, like this. The button here is already a frame with auto layout. And what we see different about this one is that we have a border, we have a stroke added to it on the outside of 4 pixels. We'll get to this in just a little bit. But for now, let's select both of these, Shift A, and now Figma automatically set their alignment to the middle. And of course, if I want, I can change the way they align. So using either the top edges, the middle, or the bottom. It really depends on what you're trying to achieve. Now, I used this demo with the outside stroke on purpose because Figma has an additional option here called strokes. And they can be either excluded or included in the layout when it comes to alignment. So right now, they are excluded, which means if I align this to the top, you'll see exactly where the top of the text elements aligns with the top of the button. but the stroke is not taken into consideration. If I'm going to switch the strokes here to included, now the top of the text will align with the top of the stroke. That's the only thing this option is doing. So if you have a layout like this, where you added a stroke and you don't get the proper alignment, then you can go here and make sure you include those strokes in the alignment process. But of course, this only works if the strokes you are using are on the outside or in the center, right? So even if I put them in the center, they will still benefit from this option. But if I put them on the inside, then it doesn't really matter if this is included or excluded. The alignment will be done the same way. And that's how you can align elements with Auto Layout. Now, alignment goes hand in hand with distribution. And in the examples that you've seen so far, we've been using the default distribution or spacing mode, and that's called packed. But that's not the only one. So coming up next, let's talk about spacing modes. Just so you understand what I mean when I say spacing modes or when I'm using the term distribution, let's select this menu item. This sits nicely in a frame with Auto Layout added, and it has a fixed spacing set between the items. Now, if I open up the additional menu or the advanced layout settings, we can see that under spacing mode, this is set to packed. And packed will basically use a fixed spacing between items. Now, space between will change that around. It will use an automatic space between items. Space will be determined by the size of the parent element. Okay, so here's what I mean by that. Let's click out of this and let's select these three elements. We have a logo, we have the menu, and we have a button. So I'm going to select all three, Shift A, and now I have a fixed spacing between them, which I can change like this. Now, watch what happens when I change the size of the parent element. Nothing. The three items stay in place right here with the same amount of spacing between them, and I have all this free space to the right of my parent frame. But now, if I go in and I change the spacing mode from packed to space between, the spacing is now set to auto, which means it's gonna be automatically set by Figma depending on the size of the parent. So the parent resizes, and the spacing here is automatically determined so that each and one of these items has equal spacing between it. How cool is that? Also, when you're changing the spacing mode or distribution, you'll see that the alignment also changes. Now we no longer have 9 options, but instead we have 3 options. Right? We can only align to the top, middle, bottom in horizontal mode, or if I were to switch this to vertical and set the spacing mode again to space between, I would have some different options here. But just keep that in mind. Whenever you're changing the distribution, you get way fewer options for alignment. And this is great for situations exactly like this one, where you want to preserve an equal amount of spacing between 2 or more items. You just set it and forget it. Figma will automatically do it for you. So that's one example. Let's have a look at demo number 9. Here, we also have a component that can be part of a list or a table that has these 4 columns. And by adding Auto Layout to it, and by setting the distribution to space between, I can make sure that these always preserve the same amount of spacing regardless of the size of the parent. Here, I just manually changed the spacing and Figma automatically reverted back to a packed spacing mode, but I can always re-enable it just like that. So this is yet another example of where you would use space between. Now, here is something interesting here. When I resize this in such a way that items overlap, Figma has an option called canvas stacking that allows you to determine how these items will be stacked. Currently, it's set to last on top, which means the red box, which is the last in my layer list, will sit on top. But if I change this to first on top, then these other items will be on top and the red box will be on the bottom. Just something quick in case you ever run into a situation like this. You know that there is an option to determine the stacking order of these elements. All right, so far we've covered spacing, padding, alignment, direction, and distribution. But there is one more thing that's hugely important when it comes to auto layout, and we haven't covered that. That's called resizing. And I'll tell you more about it in the next and final lesson. Let me start by saying this. Auto layout by itself is pretty amazing and super useful. However, this next feature that I want to talk about, called resizing, takes it to a whole different level because it allows us to control the size of the objects inside the frame with auto layout, but also the size of the frame itself. Okay, so let me show you how it works. Let's consider this demo. I have an avatar, 2 pieces of text and a button, right? And I want to, first of all, properly align these. So let's select these 2 elements, Shift A, and then let's select these 2 elements, Shift A, make sure these are aligned to the middle. And now take these 2 elements, Shift A again, and let's make sure they are aligned to the left like so. And let's add a 24 pixel gap between them. Now, when we're going to select any of these frames, for example, this one, under the frame section here in the inspector, we can see 2 fields. One is for horizontal resizing. One is for vertical resizing. This allows me to control how the frame should resize both horizontally and vertically. In other words, I can control its width and its height. By default, these are all set to hug or hug contents, meaning this frame will only be as wide and as tall as the content inside. For example, if I were to change this text, the frame itself resized because on the horizontal, it's set to hug its contents, meaning it's only going to be as wide as its contents. And the same thing goes on the vertical as well. If I'm going to add another element here, the frame will get taller because it has more content. And alternatively, if I bring this back, the frame will resize as well. However, there are 2 other options we can consider. One is fixed width. Fixed width basically sets, well, a fixed width to that frame, meaning even if I remove this element, the frame will still retain its original size, and I can even, change it like so. I can resize it manually, or I can enter a value here, and now that frame will be fixed. So no matter what content I have here, the parent frame will still be that size. Now, the other option, which is called fill container, will do the following thing. Let's select this frame and set it to fill container. This will make it as long as the available space in the parent frame. The parent frame being frame 77. Okay, so if I were to resize frame 77, frame 76, which has the property of fill container, will also resize alongside with it. And I think I can show you this a little bit better by working with this button. So this button currently is set to hug contents. But if I set it to fill container, it's going to be as wide as the parent container, which is frame 78 in this case. So if I were to resize frame 78, my button will resize alongside with it. How amazing is that? And of course, this works exactly the same on the vertical side. I can choose between hug, contents, fixed height this time, and also fill container. Right now, if I click on frame 77, this has a fixed size, but I can always change to fill container. And I can do the same for these two text elements, right? I can change them to fill container. So now if I resize the main thing, yeah, those text elements will resize as well. This is super, super important when you're creating an element that you want to reuse in other places, maybe on different screen sizes. Resizing with auto layout allows you to set the various parts of your component, of your frames, to be either a fixed width, to either hug the contents, or to fill the parent container, just like I showed you here. Let me show you another demo. This is demo number 12. So here we have elements of maybe a list or a table row. Okay, we have some text elements here, another text here, an icon, and we also have this kind of badge element. That's also a frame with auto layout. So then let's select all of these. Let's Shift A, and that created a frame with an equal fixed spacing between elements. I can always switch this from packed to space between, and this will allow me to basically resize the parent to do this. And this is working just fine. But let's do the same thing for this next row. All right, so I'll Shift A again. I'll set the spacing mode to space between, and I'll resize this to the same amount of space. Now, here already we can see a problem. Can you see the problem? We have some misalignment on this element here, on the icon, right? And that's because Figma creates the same amount of space between each item when we switch the distribution to space between. And it does the same thing here. But because the items are a different size, the spacing, the auto spacing, will be of different size. And that's why we have a misalignment. Now, how do we fix this? Well, it's very simple. We make sure that each items in this frame has a fixed width, because currently they are set to hug contents. So if I were to set the width here to maybe 140, let's also set the width here, to 140. I can set the width here to maybe 70. This is just a text element. Or actually, let's set this to 90, and this as well. Okay. And let's set this to fixed. So this frame, let's set it to, I don't know, 124. And again, we'll set this to 124. Well, you'll see that now everything aligns properly. And if I were to resize these, yeah, you'll see that the alignment is preserved, regardless of what kind of content I have in here. As long as the content doesn't go over the boundaries that I set here, we're all good. Both of these rows will have the elements aligned exactly the right way. So that's one example of using a fixed width and where it might be useful. So remember, anytime you're working with auto layout in Figma, yeah, make sure you also take into account the horizontal and vertical resizing, which can be super, super powerful. And that's about it for Figma Auto Layout, which, in my opinion, is its best feature. So I hope you found this video useful. I hope you learned something new and that you will be using Auto Layout in your own Figma projects. Also, remember, if you have any questions, please drop a comment down below. With that said, thank you very much for watching this course. And remember to check out the Envato Tuts Plus YouTube channel for more content like this, and also to learn about web design, web development, and a whole lot more. I'm Adi, and until next time, take care.